Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's What's Up Wednesday, where we are going live with you on Facebook and LinkedIn every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time to talk about our upcoming 22nd Annual International Human Trafficking and Social Justice Conference, hosted virtually coming up on September 17th through the 19th. We are getting closer every week, and it's so exciting. I also want to mention that today, July 30th, is World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. And so I'm happy to be joining you all on this day where we recognize and talk about trafficking. So welcome, everyone. My name is Anna Schramm. I am the conference planner working at the University of Toledo's Human Trafficking and Social Justice Institute. And today I am joined by two special guests. One of them, Tatiana Rothschild, is a PhD candidate in political science at Northeastern University. And the other one, Tara Burns, who might be joining us a little bit later or audio only. Tara is a survivor and researcher who has successfully lobbied for sex trafficking laws in Alaska. She is currently still in Alaska and experiencing some internet and connectivity issues trying to get on this call in Alaska. So hopefully she'll be able to pop in later and answer some of the questions. But we have Tatiana with us right now. So hi, Tatiana. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Anna.
Yeah, so today we're going to be focusing on our legal and law enforcement type sessions at the conference. So far this summer, we have talked about our programming, research, and direct service related presentations. I've also been saying every week how we are a very diverse conference. We have a lot of different topics and a lot of different professionals who come and speak. And one of those topics is hearing from legal professionals and law enforcement. But before we get into that, Tatiana, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and talk about who you are and the work that you do? And if you can even talk about who Tara is and the work that she does, well, hopefully she joins us later.
Yeah, my name is Tatiana Rothschild. I am a PhD candidate in political science at Northeastern University. My background is in the anti-trafficking movement professionally before I went on to grad school, but primarily my research focuses on root causes of human trafficking and ways that anti-trafficking policies address those root causes or fail to address those root causes, and how we end up with policies that a lot of people in the anti-trafficking movement criticize as being harmful or downright counterproductive. How do we end up with bad policies? How do we end up with good policies? And how do we do better in the future? Tara and I have worked on a couple of different projects now. We met through work with Coyote Rhode Island, which is a sex worker rights group based in Rhode Island, where I'm living and where Tara used to live and work. Now Tara is working for a community activist program in Alaska called ESPLR. And she and I are working on a couple of different projects, one of which we are presenting at the conference this year.
Awesome. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that presentation in a bit. But as you and also Tara have worked in this legal side of the issue, some people might not be as comfortable or knowledgeable about that. So can you talk a little bit more about like the importance of legal services for victims and survivors, the importance of having effective policy, what partnerships with law enforcement look like, and then maybe even mention like why we even talk about this at a conference like this when we have so many other topics. Why do we include legal and law enforcement in this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So most of my research does suggest that decreasing interactions between workers of any kind and trafficking survivors and law enforcement is actually, really necessary to proper victim identification, to making sure that workers are not harmed by policies that are kind of under the anti-trafficking umbrella, but maybe not always successfully identifying human trafficking. And specifically, the research project that Tara and I are presenting this year is looking at ways that corruption in law enforcement have made things harder for certain survivors, and ways that even like successful processes on the law enforcement side usually, or not usually necessarily, but often end up leading to federal charges of sex trafficking being pushed against sex trafficking survivors themselves. And we're looking at kind of the policy mechanisms for how that happens. So asking this question of like, what would ideally interactions with law enforcement look like is a really important discussion to have, because we know that that's a nexus of a lot of harm that's perpetuated against trafficking survivors, but it's also a policy front that the government really actively pushes as oftentimes the presented solution to any kind of human trafficking. So we have to have law enforcement interactions in order for victim identification to happen, in order for investigations to take place. And that just isn't always the case, right? So looking at policy alternatives that are less harmful and are less criminalizing for trafficking survivors is a big part of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And you speak really well about that and the nuances of the complexities of working with law enforcement and the impacts that that has negatively on survivors. So, you have been involved in our conference for the past couple of years. So, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience with our conference and why you keep coming back and talking about these issues. And yeah, just I'd love to hear about your experience with this.
Yeah, so I don't know how long I've been an attendee of the conference, a few years now. Last year was the first year that I presented, and I actually presented with Tara. I was supplementing Tara's really good research looking at some Alaska policies and case studies that she had sort of spearheaded. That presentation was really fantastic. Tara has been working for a long time in Alaska and has been really successful at her advocacy work in passing immunity laws there, and kind of leading the way for other states to look at offering legal protections for criminalized workers to be able to report violent crimes safely to law enforcement. I One thing I think I really appreciate about this conference is just the way that advocates and academics are brought together. I think especially in conferences that are held in academic spaces, particularly in political science in my field, there's often a really intentional separation of advocates' work, of advocacy research from what is being conducted academically. And I think that that's a real loss. If you know anything about my recent work with GATS, I feel very passionately about academics more proactively making sure that we're checking in with advocates, with survivors, with workers, with people who are living under the policies that we're studying, and making sure that the research agenda you're pursuing is set by community members. Because even though there are certainly gaps in the literature that may be interesting to us, if we're conducting research that is not useful for people who are living, then we end up wasting a lot of our own time and resources. So a conference like this is just a really amazing forum to bring those two spaces together. I also want to plug virtual conferences for their accessibility to people all over the world, to be able to come together and share information without having to navigate visas or travel costs or the environmental cost of a whole lot of people flying into one location. I want to plug the accessibility for disabled folks and people who are still trying not to get or spread the myriad of infections that we've been dealing with in the last few years. So a virtual conference that brings advocates and survivors and academics together around the issue of human trafficking is my bread and butter.
Well, I love that. And I love to hear that you are appreciative of the virtual conference. And every year, we have conversations about how we host it. And, because for the first 16 years, it was an in-person conference and a big switch to being virtual. But I think you really highlighted a lot of the positives of having a virtual conference. And we have seen so much growth and so many people who are able to attend and learn and collaborate on these really important issues that wouldn't have the funds to travel to attend, even if they are living a state over or a half a world away. So
Right.
I'm appreciative that you said that. And also what you mentioned has kind of been an unintentional theme throughout all of these live streams about the importance of researchers and advocates working together. We talked about that in our researcher live stream, even in our direct service one, about both of the sides of the issues, or all of the sides. It's not just a two-sided coin. It's a multifaceted thing, and every side working together, and not just in your own little space, but the importance of those collaborations. And I really think that a conference like ours, with the diversity that we have and the different types of people we bring together, is a great space for a lot of those conversations and collaborations to start. So I am glad that you also see the vision of what we are trying to do, and appreciative that you continue to come back and present. You are presenting multiple times at this year's conference. So your one presentation with Tara that you mentioned a little bit, it's titled Charging Survivors, U.S. Prosecutions of Sex Trafficking Victims for Sex Trafficking. And then you do have two other sessions, one about coercive policy models through human rights. You're going to be reviewing U.S. federal anti-trafficking policy recommendations through a textual analysis of the TIP and TDA reports. And then another session that you're doing is about 2025 U.S. policy changes, exploring the impacts on human trafficking. So I know you're going to be covering a lot of great information in all of those sessions, but wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you want the audience to know, give them a little sneak peek of what they can expect you to be talking about at this year's conference.
Yeah. So the first project that you mentioned is Charging Survivors, U.S. Prosecutions of Sex Trafficking Victims for Sex Trafficking. This is Tara Burns, my co-author's idea, and definitely like a long-standing project of hers that she's very knowledgeable about in her work as an advocate for sex trafficking survivors and in her own lived experience. So we have been reviewing federal data about how and when and where sex trafficking charges at the federal level have been pushed through, kind of looking at trends in that data, and also looking at case studies of people who are really open about the fact that they are sex trafficking survivors who have had to deal with charges of sex trafficking, and kind of unpacking within these case studies how that happens, why that happens. I mentioned corruption in law enforcement before. That's definitely been a theme of some of the cases we're looking at, but we're also seeing cases where things are being done by the book. And the way that the book is written is that sometimes on a technicality, usually a technicality about age, or a location, or sharing practices to stay safe while engaging in commercial sex, that these things that people are doing for their own safety actually end up being used in court and brought back against them for sex trafficking charges. And we are trying to get a prevalence check as to like how often we think this is happening, but that's been very difficult wading through the federal data. If you know anything about how federal court data is saved, I've learned a lot about it from Tara, and it's painful to have to wade through.
Sounds painful.
Yes, but the research has been really interesting. Tara is super knowledgeable about this. And wading through the case studies and trying to look back at those like institutional mechanisms. How do we structure policies? Like assuming in good faith that we are all trying not to get like fake or insubstantial sex trafficking charges put against survivors themselves. If we assume that everyone's on the same page that that's not helping anybody, how have we structured policies that end up doing this repeatedly, and how do we restructure policies to do better?
Yeah.
The second presentation that you mentioned is around my dissertation research. This is coercive policy models through human rights. I've been looking at the formal policy recommendations made through the U.S. Trafficking in Persons report to other countries, and the U.S. annual report on the worst forms of child labor, which is a less known but another annual report required by a trade policy, similar to the way that the TVPA requires the TIP report. And I have these huge data sets now. Actually, the presentation that I'll be covering is like the tip of the iceberg of the policy mechanisms that I'm looking at. But I've had such big data sets, such rich data sets from the TIP report and the TDA report. I'm excited really to just be able to share what I've learned about what the US actually suggests as good anti-human trafficking policy. Whether or not we consider that to actually be good anti-trafficking policy, but the policy recommendations that the US has made have changed over time, and I think a lot of activists know that. Sometimes there are some odd discrepancies between what the US is telling other countries to do and what we're actually doing here at home. And it's taken me now years to put these data sets together and get them coded and organized properly. And I'm excited to be able to share with other people who are knowledgeable about the impact of these policies, how we see those changes occurring over time, and kind of what it means at the domestic level for us to look at international policy recommendations and then to take a look at what we're doing here at home on the national front. So I am still figuring out how I'm going to keep that one short enough, because the nature of dissertation research is
I
just
mean,
that, like,
years
I've
of
now,
work and
I know,
years of data condensed into just one tiny
yes,
hour
yes.
presentation.
But this data set is setting my research agenda easily, or it could, for the next 10 years. And I'm excited to share this with people for whom this information may also be relevant, because as soon as I'm completely finished cleaning and sorting the data set, I'm hoping to get it public, and to be able to upload it online so that other people who can conduct research in these areas can start to use it. And then the last presentation that you mentioned, 2025 US policy changes exploring the impacts on human trafficking, is something that I am presenting with Glenn Harden. Both Glenn and I are members of the GATS policy work group, and we have been following a lot of the policy changes. The policy response work group at GATS has been pretty active in exploring how the policy changes that have been enacted within the last 6 months by the change in the administration, how those are impacting human trafficking survivors, what that means for service practitioners in the anti-trafficking field, what this means for actual exploitation around the world going forward with the dissolution of USAID and changes to migration policy in the US, and kind of the economic shifts that we anticipate, and all of these cascading effects as like sweeping changes are made. Glenn and I will be giving kind of an update on these really big policy areas that are likely to have longstanding effects on the anti-human trafficking field and on exploitation in the US, but also internationally. And that one we are waiting as long as possible to do, because all of these policy changes have been coming in fast, and there inevitably will be changes in the couple of weeks between, I think it's 2 weeks maybe, between when we'll actually record and when we'll present. But that's been a little overwhelming to go through, but it's also been helpful for me mentally to be kind of breaking things down into these buckets. And Glenn and I are definitely going to be trying to take a proactive and like action-centered stance on all of these. As if you're looking to mitigate harm that we anticipate from some of these policies, or looking at other impacts of the policies, here are steps that you can take.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot of information and a
I
lot of
talked for a long
great.
time. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. I think I love. I think that the legal and the policy presentations at the conference are so interesting, because whether it's talking about policies that have been in effect or policies that are currently or going to maybe change in the future, how those really impact a lot of different aspects of victims and survivors' lives, and even service providers being able to do the work that they want to and need to do. Like, policy really does impact a lot, even if we don't think about it, or if it gets too technical and we don't read all of the very long policies or the very long reports that you have all of this data on, how it really just impacts so many different aspects of the well-being or the services that we're able to provide. So I think that it's really interesting, and thank you for bringing all of that information to the conference. So anybody who's listening, if you found that that was also very interesting as I did, make sure that you are registered for our conference so you can hear more from Tatiana and Tara. So you'll want to go to our website, which is traffickingconference.com/register, so you can sign up to attend. I do want to talk about some of the other legal and law enforcement presentations that we're going to have at the conference. This is just a few because hopefully now, as you know, that I have said, we have over 110 breakout sessions at this year's conference. It's a lot of great content, a lot of great information. Can seem a bit overwhelming, but remember that if you have registered for the conference, you do have access to the recordings of the breakout sessions to watch for 3 weeks after the conference. So if there's something that you missed or sessions were happening at the same time, you can go back and watch those sessions. So we really want to just get this information into your hands so you have access to all of this great stuff. So a couple of the ones that I want to mention are Madeleine Moffitt and Eva Garrido will be talking about federal prosecutions of human trafficking. Why does data matter? And Dory Rivkin will be presenting on findings on implementation and outcome of the law prohibiting consumption of prostitution in Israel. Next, Dr. Kesben Yagsi Sokat and Tracy Hochstad will be talking about a legal analysis of labor trafficking cases with a transportation lens. And then Caroline Pisano will be presenting her session on advocacy strategies to end the criminalization of human trafficking survivors. And then Dr. Dominique Rosepowitz and Ariana Weed will be presenting on a sex trafficking awareness and recovery group providing intervention in a jail setting. So we're going to have several other presentations about law enforcement and legal issues, along with a lot of other different topics. So you can view our full schedule with all of those presentations. You can read the descriptions of them. You can read about the presenters, so you can figure out which sessions you want to attend. So go to our website, traffickingconference.com/schedule, and you can see all of those on there. So Tatiana, before we end today, is there anything else that you would like to add?
I don't think that I have much else to add. I will say that I think it was, well, yes, it must have been 2020 because I was home with a lot to do. I did at some point save 20 sessions from the conference to listen to. I remember walking around and doing housework with my headphones in my ear, just listening to recorded sessions. I do really appreciate the conference's format. And I will plug the GATS policy work group's upcoming events. Check out the GATS website if you're interested in hearing any information about the impact of changes in immigration policy on human trafficking. We'll be exploring that in the next couple of months. But otherwise, Anna, I'm just looking forward to checking in with you about this in September.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and all of the great work that you do. As mentioned, we do go live on Facebook and LinkedIn every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern time to continue to talk about our conference. Next week, we are taking a break as we prepare to ramp up for the conference, but the following week, we will be back with special guest Nani Quadrado, and we're going to be talking about our healthcare presentation. So if you want to go to our website, learn about anything that we talked about today, how to register, how to view our schedule, all of that great stuff, you can find that at traffickingconference.com. So thank you again, Tatiana, and give my best to Tara and thank her for all of the work that she has done. I am sure that Alaska is great to have her, but it's probably harder to get onto Zoom calls or live things if internet is not cooperating. But thank you to both of you for taking the time out of your day to join us. And, thank you everybody for watching and tuning in, and we will see you at our next What's Up Wednesday. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Anna.